does seem to be getting somewhat desperate at the moment, because obviously I think that was something that I think I really liked about him last season. And I mentioned it at the end of kind of when we were wrapping up last season. I mentioned it must feel really good. I think Dom, there was the episode where Dom came on, and I mentioned it must be really good to have a manager that's like super defiant and kind of answers questions well and shows like real accountability, like kind of total accountability for the team in his press conferences. And I think ever since I've said that, he's gone the opposite way now. And it appears that he's now blaming a lot more on kind of external things and a little bit less on what he can do as a manager. And I'm starting to get a little bit worried for him. And this kind of get onto my kind of major question, which is um, I feel like at the moment with Ten Hag, there's not much more you can do to show your team that you mean business than to get rid of one of the best players ever in your team because he doesn't track back, to sack off one of the most exciting players, or at the time one of the most exciting players in the world. I feel like he's shown quite a lot. Like, he benched your best player last season for being late. He's done a lot of things to show that team you lot need to fix up, and it apparently has not fully worked. And it's getting to a point now where, like, I feel like desperation maybe is a good word to explain how he sounds in his press conferences. So that leads me on to the question, which is I keep getting these adverts from Betfred and whoever else saying, Pochettino, Ten Hag, they've got their odds are dropping for them to be sacked this season. And so we've obviously seen some criticism on some call-in shows and that, like TalkSport and all them lot, where some fans are going in on him and saying, get rid of him. He's not the right man to lead the club. How do you see it? Like, how far does it need to go with Man United before you can see Ten Hag getting the sack?
Yeah, I mean, everything's so reactionary. So last season, I think everyone was understandably kind of jumping on the Ten Hag bandwagon a lot because, to be honest, we overachieved with the signings we managed to get in, with the deadwood we still had available, with some of the batterings we received, we still finished in third and managed to win a trophy, which was super important for us at that time. And probably not what was expected of Ten Hag in that first season. So I think there's this idea that he's got a bit of credit in the bank, which I do buy into. But he's got to get some criticism. And he's got to get some criticism for, I think, two main reasons. The first obvious reason is on the pitch and why he's not getting the best out of the players that he's had at his disposal at the beginning of the season. I do think there's some caveats with that, though, and I will get my mini violin out and say the injuries we've had have obviously the teams we've been able to select are definitely nowhere near his first choice 11. And I think that is something we can all at least agree and acknowledge. So it's been quite difficult. He's had some obstacles on that side. Then you've obviously got all of this crazy. He is justified in the external factors thing because having Greenwood, Sancho, and Anthony situations all happening in quick succession before kind of the season's even kicked off is mad. Like, I can't think of another team that's had to deal with that many separate crazy incidents in such a short space of time. But again, there's no one to blame for that other than ourselves and the club. Maybe not Ten Hag, because I don't think he's created these situations. I know there's some content creators out there that blame him with the Sancho stuff, and I have to have my say on this very quickly. He's right, and he's well within his rights to explain the reason why he didn't select Sancho. And if it purely is because in his mind, his training levels haven't reached the required level to start or be in the squad, then that's fair. That is not him digging out a player. I don't know where we've gone with all these fans and content creators and people in the football like fraternity and society, where they all think this now justifies like throwing him under the bus and saying he's done XYZ. Watch the press conference. He couldn't be more clinical in the way that he says it. There's no emotion. It's clear there's no like deep ulterior motive. He's just explained the situation. Now, some people might be right in that he's doing it to try and get a reaction. Sure. But he didn't do a Jose. He didn't do a Pep. He didn't do some managers who've gone out there and absolutely thrown them under the bus. what he did was actually very timid, very tame, and I think something that a manager should be allowed to do without getting all of this backlash that he's now gotten from the media and some of our own fans, some rival fans, talking about how they're throwing him under the bus. Jadon Sancho has dealt with this absolutely poorly. So, okay, football's changed. You may not be able to be how Sir Alex Ferguson was, Arsene Wenger was, and have complete control in the club anymore, and treat players in a certain way anymore, and that's fair enough. But you should now and in the future always be allowed to explain why a player hasn't been selected without it being this big thing that's been created. It's only become a big thing because Jadon Sancho decided to post his iPhone notes on social media and talk about him being a scapegoat. And the annoying thing is the media have now made him a scapegoat, but I don't think Ten Hag had made him a scapegoat. Ten Hag had backed him this whole time and literally just said he didn't train well. Like, my God, that's not digging someone out. And that's certainly not scapegoating. So sadly, I think his career is going to be done at United. And I think he's only got himself to blame. I really don't think you can blame anyone else in this scenario. You can only blame himself for the way he's been training, for the way he's been playing on the pitch, and for everything that's gone on around his career. It's only him. Only he needs to look in the mirror. So that's another thing that's, obviously caused some instability, because I'm sure he's, close with Rashi, he's close with a few players in the squad. And, it can set, the cat amongst the pigeons. And the second thing that I think you could say Ten Hag deserves criticism for is some of the rubbish he's been saying in the press conferences. He hasn't been defiant. He hasn't been speaking like someone who, is upset with how the team has been performing. And he's completely kind of gone inward, and kind of now it looks very much like he's kind of just accepting of how things are going, and now trying to take no responsibility for how the team is performing and trying to resolve some of the issues that I've just mentioned. So he absolutely deserves criticism. He absolutely should not be waffling some of the rubbish he's been saying in press conferences. At the same time, there shouldn't be fans going on TalkSport or wherever saying he should be sacked and he's caused all these problems. He's literally the firefighter taking on a whole building on fire. And he's not to blame for that fire. He's just trying to fix it. He might not be, aiming his hose at the right areas to get it done at the moment, but he's trying. And our club stinks. And it's the one thing that rival fans have been saying forever. And to be honest, a lot of United fans have been saying for a good chunk of time, we are a poorly run club. We've made so many mistakes, some of which that have been invisible, but they all eventually come home to roost. And sadly for Ten Hag, it seems to be a lot of them are happening now at the same time, and he's having to deal with them. So, sure, he definitely should be doing better. He should definitely be getting the players to play better. He should definitely be talking with more sense and more defiance in his press conferences, and he hasn't been doing that recently. But I don't see a world in which he's no longer the manager this season. I think he will see out the season regardless.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, I agree with you for the most part of that. I definitely think that Sancho has kind of brought it upon himself, and I feel like when we were watching the TalkSport kind of press conference clip, he was pretty clear about it. There was nothing disparaging that he said about Sancho, and I think everyone kind of just made a much bigger deal out of it because of the fact that Sancho came out and kind of answered it. So I do think maybe Sancho is the one that kind of started that, but then there's got to be a ton of blame placed on the media for how they kind of just amplified it and made it go a lot more viral than it really needed to be. There's nothing wrong with calling a player out if they're not training well. If it's completely different, then Sancho, come out and back yourself. Tell me exactly what he did to say that. Don't just give me a cryptic message to say you're being scapegoated and it's for other reasons that you won't name. So come out, do a Piers Morgan interview if you have to, mate. I don't mind. Do whatever you got to do.
As well.
At this point, Piers Morgan will take anyone he can get. So
but I would have respected. I would have respected that more. Like the Ronaldo Piers Morgan thing, he literally just like dropped a bomb and he was like, "F
Massive
this,
cojones.
it's
Yeah, yeah.
irreparable. I'm just gonna go and do, what I can and just go out with a blaze of, I don't want to say glory because it ended quite sadly, but Sancho did it so timid. It's literally been consistent. His performances, his behaviour, everything about Sancho since he's been at United has been timid. Even his response to Ten Hag was timid. So yeah, stinks, man. And I love Sancho. People have seen me on this pod before back him and still say, I'll be there for him. But yeah, I don't know, man. This is where I draw the line. There's no coming back from this.
Well, I mean, particularly because he's kind of somewhat inadvertently kind of knocked over the first domino that's leading to other negative things for the club, right? Because I think we can't separate some of this media criticism that's happening from the performances that you see on the field, right? It's really difficult to say that these things haven't affected Ten Hag, they haven't affected the team, the morale, all of the things. When, as you said, with injuries, I will concede that you have had an absolute shocker so far with injuries, and you just don't need something else to be coming in and making things even worse for you. So I think from that perspective, I agree completely. And I wanted to get onto one more thing before we move to the kind of Champions League and Game Week 6 preview, and that's really all around the Glazers. I saw Gary Neville came out on X, and he wrote quite a long tweet addressing the fact that it's still the Glazers' fault. Kind of alluded to the fact that if you own a business, you have to own all of the failures and all of the successes by yourself. That's what you have to do. So I wanted to just kind of get to that point and say, he kind of had mentioned, performances on the pitch can be erratic and cyclical, but it's the owners that put you in the best position to actually win matches and for that performance to be kind of positively cyclical, right? To be more often than not good. So I guess my question to you is, like, how much of the blame for the recent performances and the recent issues that you've had can be put on the Glazers? Do you think it's like 100% their fault? Do you think it's 50-50? Where are you sitting here?
It's a hard one, man, because I've obviously seen that tweet from G Nev. He's been fairly consistent in the last 2.5, 3 years or so, with his criticism of the Glazers. Obviously, most United fans would agree that they're absolute scumbags and we need to get them out. But it's hard for me to say like every single morsel of blame can be put on their doorstep. Like they are obviously the owners, so they control the purse strings, they set the culture, they are directly responsible for a lot of the instability and malaise that we've seen this summer with all the sale rumors and all of these things going on around it. So I think they are heavily to blame for basically the moment Sir Alex Ferguson left the club till now. I think when Sir Alex Ferguson and David Gill were there, it was obvious that they ran the ship and that the Glazers were kind of silent investors just raking in the dough as, the club was getting more and more successful. As soon as they left and they got more control, they've proved to be completely incompetent. They've proved to not give a shit about the club and the team and the performances on the pitch. They've been terrible custodians of the club. Like, they've literally let the stadium rot. They've let our training facilities just, be overtaken by pretty much every single Premier League club. So by every barometer you can look at a good owner, they pretty much fail all of them. The only one that people, and the argument people use around the spending money, I get it. It's true. They could have been worse, even worse. They could have decided they're going to spend 5% of our revenue rather than 40% or whatever it is that they end up spending on transfers. But the thing that people always forget to, and it's a problem that your club, Johnson, and Arsenal have as well, is we sell poorly. So when you look at, for example, Liverpool, who are another club where their owners don't put any of their own money into it, they kind of don't have to, because they run the organization, they run the business well. They put good people in position to make key decisions that will help, set the club on the right course. And big part of that is selling. And you guys are terrible at selling. We're terrible at selling, even worse probably. And that hampers your business as well. So if you're not going to sell well, then you need to put more money in because you still need to get better players. And this is what happened this summer where they talk all this rubbish about we need to sell to buy. Like, or maybe it wasn't rubbish because you saw at the end we got Amrabat on loan. So that's a big part of their transfer responsibility that they've completely failed. Sure, have they put money in? Yes. Can you say any of the money that we've spent has been spent well? Some of the players have been decent, but nearly every single player we've talked about this has been
Ten Hag
overspent.
was true. Ten Hag said it in his press conference. He was talking a lot of crap. He did say like, "Oh, even Brighton spend money." But the one thing he did say that I think was accurate was Man United coming into a transfer and try and buy someone, you're gonna get bumped. It's just the way of the world. Everyone knows that you spend money terribly, and they come at you. They know, just like kind of like Chelsea these days as well. We're gonna bump you for this, and Man United are really the godfathers of that movement of getting bumped by smaller teams. So that was one thing that he did say that I thought was actually accurate in amongst a bunch of crap.
Yeah. So yeah, that's another facet that you can blame the Glazers, right? Like they maybe not them personally, although I would like to add, it's well known that they have final sign off on all big transfers. So even though they hired Ed Woodward, even though they've now got Richard Arnold, even though we've now got John Murtough, who's the director of football, still they require sign off. So when we can't get Perisic because we're 5 million out at the time, it was because they didn't want to sign him off. When we've been trying to get other players and we've just not been able to make the transfer work because the finances weren't right, it's because the Glazers decided they weren't. And the annoying part of that financial debate is they should always be right for us. We should be allowed to waste and piss away all the money in the world because we actually generate it. Sure, it's not good for the game. Sure, it makes it's unlevel playing field and all that kind of stuff. But the reality of the club generating that much money, of course, the fans want to see that much money being spent. If it's not directly on players on the pitch, at least let it be on the infrastructure. At least let it be on something else so we know that you actually care about the club. All of which they don't do, all of which they've proven the opposite by taking dividends and just constantly trying to suck money out of the club. The fact that we've now got more than £1 billion in debt, it's obvious that they're poor owners. But at the same time, you can't say 100% because even with poor owners, they don't go on the pitch. And of course, what Alan Shearer said is true as well. Match of the Day, he said, the culture eventually comes down from the top and seeps down from the top onto the pitch. And I think the biggest thing that they've impacted on the squad is all the player power that we've got in. And you see it, all the leaks coming out, all the this coming out. We didn't have that under Sir Alex Ferguson. We didn't have that under David Gill. And ever since they've been more involved in the club and the running of the club, we've always had that. And it undermines the manager. It undermines the harmony in the team because then they don't sell those players who are upset. They don't sell the Maguires, the McTominays, the Dean Hendersons, all these people that have been creating instability in the team. They keep them. So it just allows that kind of negative culture to keep growing and becoming a bigger and bigger problem. So, yeah, I would give them a lion share of the blame, 100%. They smell, they're terrible, and they don't care about us. But yeah, 100% is mad. And of course, we've got the tools. They have bought some players for us to do better than we're currently doing. So it's not 100%, but they will always be involved as a reason as to why the club is failing, as long as they're the owners, because they've proven it non-stop that they don't care about the club.